So in this third part, we're going to continue on looking at the non-specific host defenses here, and we're going to focus in on the cellular defenses that are built into us from before we're actually born. In our third part to this lecture on the non-specific innate host defenses of your immune system, we're going to take a look at the cellular defenses that are out there. And when we look at this process, we need to remember to go back to this idea of where the cells are coming from. And early on in embryonic development, we can actually find that the process of hematopoiesis, or the production of blood cells, is starting to occur. It's going to get taken over by a lot of cells in the liver and also cells in your lymphatic system. So when we look at this process, you're going to have it happening as an adult, primarily in the bone marrow there. And so when we look at this, you're going to have cells that are out there that are known as hematopoietic stem cells. And these guys are the basis for the elements of your blood right there. And they're going to divide by mitosis. And some of them are going to hang out as these stem cells, and others are going to get bathed in different kinds of chemicals that are out there. Again, think hormones that are out there and other kinds of cytokines and chemokines, and that's going to cause them to effectively go to school, and they will take on different lineages that are out there. And so these stem cells can divide and become myeloid stem cells or lymphoid stem cells over here. And then they're going to go on further to assume their specialized form that we will find inside of your body. And these different cells that we see down here are not only going to be different in terms of their appearance, but also in terms of the function of these mature cells that are out there. And so we'll take a look at this process here in terms of the final production of the working kinds of cells that are out there. And when we look at this, two of the prominent ones that you've seen if you've looked at a blood smear out there are your red blood cells that are going to be formed over here off of this lineage, and those are also known as erythrocytes. And if you were to take a microliter, so a fraction of a drop of blood, you would find on average about 5 million of these red blood cells in that little 1 microliter drop. You're also going to find some platelet cells that are out there that are kind of interesting. They actually pinch off of this megakaryocyte over here, and so they're effectively chunks or fragments of this cell that are circulating around in your bloodstream, and they are going to function during blood clotting and release various chemicals and be involved in this process of plugging up these leaks that are out there. And so you can see we'll find these platelets a lot less than you would find with your red blood cells that are out there. But we've still got all of these other cells that are coming out from these original stem cells that we're going to find primarily in your bone marrow as an adult that's out there. And that's where we're looking at your white blood cells, or what are known as leukocytes. And if you look at that, where we were looking at hundreds of thousands to millions for our red blood cells and our platelets, with your white blood cells, we're talking about 5,000 to 10,000 range for these inside of that small 1 microliter drop of blood that's out there. So a lot of different versions of these white blood cells with 5 to 10,000 of them out there. And these are the ones that are going to be moving throughout your body and searching for potential pathogens and foreign products. So they will be able to recognize to a greater extent what is you or self or your own body cells from an invading pathogen, or what's known as non-self. And when we look at these, we can identify them from your blood or various tissues in your body by doing staining on them. And so we can separate them into two major classes or groups of white blood cells that are out there. Some of them are going to be granulocytes, and they are also characterized by having these weird lobes on their nuclei. It's not your sort of smooth circular form that you find out there in what are known as agranulocytes. The granulocytes not only have the lobe nuclei, they also have little nuggets floating around in their cytoplasm that are getting stained by the dye. So thus the granules inside the cells there, versus the agranulocytes over here. And these guys tend to have that more round nucleus, but they also are lacking these particles that would stain in the cytoplasm for the cells. So if we look at this, now we know that we've got these three primary groups of cells in your blood, and your white blood cells, or leukocytes, can be further broken down into two separate categories. What about the individuals? So if you think about this, this is almost a taxonomic hierarchy for what we're looking at here, with the production of these cells into these different classes or different groups. If we look at the granulocytes that are out there, you can recognize them because all of them have Phil in their name there, because they like certain kinds of dye. So remember, acidophiles that are out there, they like acid conditions, while these guys are sort of neutral in their they like either type of dye that's used when they do this white blood cell smear and staining process. They actually will use a basic dye and an acidic dye. And so here we can see our eosinophils. These guys like the eosin, or the acidic dye, and you're going to find these little sort of orangish granules. Your basophils, they like basic dyes. So methylene blue or crystal violet basic dyes are going to highlight or stain these little particles floating around inside the cytoplasm for the cells there. When you look at the function for these, your neutrophils, those are the most predominant of your white blood cells. Normally, these will make up almost half of the white blood cells floating around in your bloodstream circulating. They are phagocytic cells, and they will release some toxic chemicals. But kind of the interesting thing is they can also release what's known as a neutrophil extracellular trap, or a net, which effectively is their way of netting the pathogen, and then the phagocytosis can occur. So that's a function for why we have these guys floating around throughout our body, is they're going to trap things and eat them. Your eosinophils here, these guys are going to be the second most prominent one that we'll find out there. And they are going to have these little granules contain a variety of different kinds of enzymes. They'll have lysozyme, which we saw before is in your bodily secretions, and it'll lyse peptidoglycan. So these guys can release even more of that. They can also release peroxidase enzymes to break down peroxides, and digestive enzymes that'll break down proteins or RNA or DNA. They will release toxic chemicals and also chemicals that'll trigger inflammation. And the primary reason that we think that they are there is these guys are going to latch on to a big pathogen, like a protozoan cell, or more specifically a worm. And these guys are just going to unload all these little granules to try and basically poke holes in the worm, because a phagocytic cell cannot eat the worm. It's just too big. It'd be like you stuffing an elephant in your mouth. It's just not going to work. So really kind of interesting to look at these different types of cells that are out there. If we look at our basophils that like basic dyes, thus you've got these purple granules inside of our cytoplasm right here, and it turns out these guys are storing up heparin, which is an anticoagulant. So you don't have very many of these basophils, but they will be in circulation and help to prevent your blood from coagulating. And these guys also can release the chemical histamine, which is going to cause inflammation. So people with allergies, they're going to have these basophils, or what are known as mast cells inside of your tissues here. They're going to be dumping histamine that's going to cause that redness. If you've seen somebody with allergies, when they get the red of their eyes, you're looking at the arterioles that are actually swelling up in the whites of their eyes to give them that little red track right there. And that's going to be coming from cells that are relatives of the basophils that are out here, that are actually residing in the tissue or near the surface of your body, in your skin, in your mucous membranes. So those are all granulocytes. The granules are actually where they're storing up these different chemical mediators that are going to either destroy, trap, or trigger your immune system reaction that's out there. When we look at the other side of that little group there, we go from our granulocytes to our agranulocytes. Now we're looking at your white blood cells that are lacking these cytoplasmic granules. And one of the really interesting ones that we found out there is what's known as a natural killer cell, or an NK cell. And these little guys, notice, they actually respond to our interferon alpha and beta that would be secreted during a viral infection. These guys will sniff it out and they will get activated. So think these guys are on steroids now. And they are going to run around and secrete interferon gamma, which is going to attract even more of the phagocytic cells that are out there that can start eating things. And so this NK cell here can actually start to help or aid the process of destroying the cells that are infected with a virus that's out there. And then that cell lyses or explodes. Well, you don't have to worry about it making new virions because the cell has committed suicide as a result of the activity of your natural killer as a result of the secretion of these chemicals. So you can see, kind of like with our complement cascade, we've got a domino effect of all these things that are going on simultaneously, or in order, I should say. If we look at some of the other agranulocytes that we find out here, we also have what are known as lymphocytes. And so like the name says, these are lymph cells, and so they're going to circulate it in your blood, and you will also find them in your lymphatic system. When your blood leaks out the fluids into your tissues, we collect about 25% of that fluid and it goes back into circulation. The other 75% is this extracellular fluid that will get collected in your lymphatic system, and then you will filter those fluids as you return them back to the circulatory system, and you dump your lymph fluids into your circulatory system and increase that volume of fluids in your bloodstream there. And here with our lymphocytes, we've got two major groups of them, your B cells and your T cells, and we'll look at both of these guys in the next chapter. And if you look, the lymphocytes, they estimate probably maybe 20 to 35% of white blood cells in circulation. So you've got a whole bunch of neutrophils floating around, and you've got a whole bunch of these lymphocytes that are floating around in your bloodstream. And when you look at this, think about, you are making a lot of these cells constantly from your bloodstream, and they're going in circulation all over the place. So really a lot of cells, but also remember, we're only looking at 5 to 10,000 white blood cells per microliter, whereas you're looking at 3 to 5 million red blood cells per microliter. So a lot more of these other cells and your platelets or your parts of cells compared to all of these white blood cells that are out there. The last kind of white blood cell that we can find on the agranulocyte category over here are your monocytes. And here we can see some examples of some monocytes floating around in your bloodstream right here. They do have that more circular nucleus right there. But these guys are going to be floating around in circulation and traveling around, and they do have some sort of lightly stained granules there that do contain some digestive enzymes. But the reason why we have the monocytes is these guys can actually go from circulation and go into your tissues. And inside of your tissues, they can turn into macrophages. And if you look at macrophage, big eater. And that's their function there. The macrophage is going to go around eating up all the messes that are left over from, say, activation of complement and the inflammation that occurred. The dead cells that's left over, the macrophages are going to go in there and eat them up. And then they're actually going to take a little chunk of these foreign molecules that are out there, and they will put them on the surface. And we'll see that when we look at antigen processing cells in the next chapter here. The other major real reason for these macrophages is these guys are going to be releasing some more of those cytokines that are going to start to assist your immune system in activation that's out there. And if we look at these macrophages that we can find in tissues, you can see they're all over the place in throughout your body. Not only are they in your bloodstream, but they're going to be hanging out inside your connective tissues that are out there. So there's your example with your mast cells. We find the monocytes floating around here in your blood. You've got macrophages in your intestines that are out there. You've got cells inside of your liver known as Kupffer cells. You filter your bloodstream through there, and these macrophages are going to be hanging out there to try and eat these things. Throughout your skin, you've got what are known as dendritic cells that send out these long, thin dendrites or processes to help trap the pathogens that are out there. You've got inside of your lungs, you're going to have alveoli alveolar macrophages that are eating things that you're breathing in. So a lot of different things going on with the macrophages.